Hey, everybody, welcome back to the JPU Show, the first episode of the Jack's Podcast United show of 2025. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Badr Milligan, and I've got the beautiful big brain, Blythe Blythe, here with me.
Blythe
Milligan,
wow.
I'm sorry. You said Blythe Blythe on the panel.
No, you
I
did.
noticed it.
Oh, I did.
You did. Anyways, we're your hosts, and we are recording live from Podfest 2025, and we are actually not aside from recording on site at Podfest, we're also recording from the Ecamm booth. Well, actually, they got a whole room.
So Ecamm with Sure.
With Sure.
Yeah.
At the Unstuck Studios.
Yes.
Ecamm Unstuck Studios. That's what it is. Okay, so big shout outs to Ecamm, and then big shout outs to Sure, who is here at Podfest. And they've been showing some pretty great new microphones that I've been really impressed by. But anyways, like I said, this is our first episode of 2025. And we wanted to hop on the mics while our experience here at Podfest is still fresh on our mind and talk about some of the top takeaways that we've learned and gotten out of our interactions here. Talk about some of our favorite interactions, some of the people, the companies, the sponsors, et cetera, that we've met. Talk about experience, getting to meet other podcasters here in Orlando at Podfest. Blythe, how are you feeling? Overall, how has the experience at Podfest been? I know this has been it's been 2 years since we attended our first Podfest. This is our second one now. How are you feeling about it?
I think for this one, it's different. So there's two main conferences that we have been to for podcasting, and that's Podcast Movement and also Podfest itself. And so with Podfest, it's more of the independent creators. It's more of, or the people that are just getting started. And so I love to see this dynamic because it feels like where we were when we first started. And I think that this is a situation where we, with our experience of podcasting more than 10 years, each of us, that we can offer the greatest amount of value. I think that, with JPU in general, I've spent a few years, this is probably just me on my side, but trying to figure out, yes, this is a business, but how do we make money off of this business? Or how do we at least break even? And so I think a lot of our events or coming to Podfest itself, it's trying to figure out what the ROI goal is. And ROI is just a recurring conversation. And I have to kind of come back to my own advice that I give to other podcasters is maybe ROI just looks different. Maybe ROI is just different for our specific podcast or our specific business. Much like many other podcasters out there, no matter if you've been podcasting for 20 years, like we had a conversation last night with somebody who had been podcasting since 2004, who was hosting his own files online, that he was still struggling with the same monetary sponsorship conversations as many podcasters are struggling with today, and trying to answer those questions over and over. And so I think it's like a lot of the thing. Numbers change, years change, but a lot of the questions still stay the same.
Absolutely. And I guess we should also mention that we just wrapped up a panel here at Podfest alongside our good friends and frequent collaborators with the JPU, Tom Rossi of Buzzsprout and Alex Sanfilippo of Podmatch. We just wrapped up a panel about unconventional ways to monetize your show, thinking outside of traditional ads, and just sharing our experiences with finding sponsors and thinking outside of the box when it comes to making money off our podcast. Which went really well. It's always impressive to. I had no doubt about the attendance of that podcast because I feel like monetization is always a hot topic in podcasting. So it was nice to see a pretty full crowd and people that were both engaged and passionate about the topic. So and we'll talk a little more about our panel. But I wanted to maybe work back to day one, work through our timeline here at Podfest. So me and you got down here on Thursday afternoon with the goal of just registering, easing our way into Podfest, and getting situated with the expo floor. But we were able to attend the Buzzsprout meetup. Anything that stands out to you? Any highlights from that first day?
I think the thing that sticks out the most is how creative podcasters are at marketing their show.
Oh, yes.
So
I have never seen so many QR codes printed on the back of shirts.
Branded sweatpants. I saw branded suits, branded blazers where they have their show logo all over it. They have QR codes on the back of their blazer. There's even a woman like running around and she has an inflatable dragon that
Yes,
she
I've seen
finds
that.
it difficult to get into rooms because the inflatable dragon is too big. And so my first thought was, why don't you just get rid of the dragon? But I'm remembering her out of a sea of people because of that creative approach to her show. And so I think
Yes.
that the marketers are, it's just really interesting to see the different creative aspects of trying to get attention for your show.
There's no such thing as a shameless plug at a podcast conference. Podcasters can not only talk, but boy, oh boy, can they sell themselves.
Yes.
So Thursday, I mean, for the most part, it's safe to say Buzzsprout threw an amazing, meetup and an
That's when
amazing
everybody's
party.
getting in town. So, there's not too much stuff going on. This is a conference that typically will happen over the weekend.
So that was Thursday evening. Let's move into Friday, where we got to experience a full, day at Podfest. I know personally, attending panels was kind of my goal. I do find a lot of value in the different panels and the different tracks they have here at Podfest. And the first panel I attended was one based around. The title was "How I Make a Full-Time Living as a Podcast Editor and Producer," which kind of piqued my interest as someone that has been editing his own show for almost going on 10 years and kind of doesn't mind getting into like the nitty-gritty when it comes to editing and the audio technical side of things. I found that panel extremely fascinating. It was run by two professional editors who run the Podcast Editors Academy and Club. They've got a few different verticals. They do an academy. They do a podcast editors mastermind class. They do. They've got like a Facebook group page that's got like 90,000 folks. So they're very ingrained into the podcast editing community. So these two gentlemen were able to share a lot of valuable insight from their community. And I think that's the power of building your own community, is that you can survey the folks in your community, especially when you're talking about a group of editors who are doing a lot of freelance work, a lot of entrepreneurs and entrepreneur minded people. So they had a lot of valuable information to share in terms of like what editors are charging based on the folks in their club, how long they're spending on episodes, the type of sponsors and companies that they work with. And I mean, the major takeaway, not to be long winded, is that if you're looking to make money in podcasting and you're a little tech savvy and you're interested in the audio side, there is a lot of money to be made on the editors and finding your own clients and working with other podcasters. Because let's be real, how many podcasters come to our meetups and might not start their podcast journey because they realize just how much effort goes into creating a podcast, editing your own show. I think if you're someone that is entrepreneur minded and you want to maybe have a stream of income, look into editing, especially this podcast editors club. I mean, like I said, I was fascinated by not just and the amount of services that you can provide as an editor when you think about all the different aspects that come with podcasting, editing, recording, marketing, hosting. They were talking about how a lot of their editors have started offering different services for podcasters to just so that way podcasters can just focus on creating the show, being a host. I thought it just kind of opened my mind and gave me a different perspective on the ability to be a professional editor.
Well, I think too, especially from talking to you about this particular event or this particular panel that you sat in on, is the productization of their service. And so, what I mean by that is, you as a experienced podcaster, you know what goes into editing your show. And so, if you were to take those steps and teach someone else how to do it, you would have to write down each of those steps and then figure out, what do I need to do? And then maybe what can somebody else do?
Mhm.
And I think for a lot of folks who are entering into this industry, they develop that expertise because they can't afford to pay. That was my experience, is that I had to learn it myself because I couldn't afford to pay somebody else to do it for me. But once I got to a certain level of understanding, and I also got sponsorship support, then I was able to teach someone else how to do it the way I want it done. I think for that particular business, where it helps a ton is that you are going to the podcasters themselves, and you are saying, no, I'm going to cut to the chase because I have this expertise for maybe 10 plus years. It sounds like these guys have been doing it for a long time, but they're the ones going to their customers and saying, no, we know how to do this. We don't necessarily need they need your input to a certain level, but they're not going to know the editing granular levels that they know it. And so I think treating it as a business, telling people, no, you're coming to me to solve a problem, so I'm going to productize my service and then be able to sell it out and then teach other people how to do the same thing and then share information, the data I think that they're collecting from all of these different podcast editors. I thought that was super interesting because that data is it's not something that you can regularly come across, but it's super relevant to that specific audience. So they're developing products and services and content and sponsorship opportunities based on their level of expertise.
And I was able to pull up the names. It was run by Steve Stewart and Mark Deal, who are the founders of the podcast. I don't know if they were founders, but they're heavily involved in the podcast editors academy, club, and mastermind. And so if my goal was to find out more about, this particular track of podcasting, it excelled. I learned a lot. My interest is highly piqued. I think I will be looking to the podcast editors club. So for any of our listeners who, like I said, are entrepreneur minded, tech savvy, are into the audio aspect, I think that is a really great thing to look into if you're looking to maybe start a business.
Yeah, lots of ways to make money in podcasting that have nothing to do with sponsorships. Yep.
And then I'll highlight one more panel that I attended yesterday, and that was the How I Grew a 100,000 YouTube channel in 2 years. It was hosted by Stephen Robles, good friend of ours, a good collaborator. He's done
JPU speaker too.
JPU speaker. He's done a couple events of our own. He's also heavily involved with Riverside. He does a lot of their training videos. So his face is all over all of the Riverside promo. But I attended that one once again, just to kind of, add an intrigue. Our guy Steven was there hosting it. So I thought I'd come out and support. And I mean, his panel was packed. Obviously, I think with YouTube being the central theme of that panel, and YouTube being a hot topic in podcasting, and a lot of podcasters making that shift to video and utilizing YouTube as that channel, as their primary channel, it was no surprise that it was a packed panel. And Steven shared, he was very transparent. He shared a lot of snapshots from his YouTube dashboard about his retention rate, his download increases. Even some of his monetary information on, what videos are monetizing was all there. So, big shout out to Steven for being very transparent. He did a great job in terms of breaking down like a beginner, intermediate, and then a pro level in terms of like equipment, and things like that. Obviously I can't remember every detail, but the big takeaway I got out of that was bringing value, always emphasizing value in your videos, because YouTube is such a saturated market. And then just the retention rate. He was telling us even his retention in certain videos, some folks aren't getting past half the video. So it's very important to front load all of your videos. I think he was saying something like the first 15 seconds are the most critical part of any YouTube video, because you need to, obviously make your introduction, but also let the listener and the viewer know what is the value. And obviously the most important thing is delivering on said value. There was a question from the audience about like clickbait, titles and, clickbaity thumbnails, and is that fair game? And he, his thoughts on that. And Steven, I loved what he said is, it's only clickbait if you don't deliver on the click. So always deliver on the click, So I thought that was pretty valuable. And just his emphasis on testing things out, utilizing YouTube's A/B testing for like things like thumbnails and titles. He was just telling us about how certain old videos sometimes like regain popularity, and his experience of like just testing out as much as he can, but always putting value in the forefront. And, finding that intersection between something you're knowledgeable. I think he called it the Venn diagram, where on one side you've got, what are you really knowledgeable at? What are you very passionate about? And find that intersection, and that should be your YouTube channel. So I found a lot of value in that.
Yeah, I don't think I attended one panel on Friday. I had a different mindset, a different set of goals. I really gravitate towards sort of the expo floor of conferences and being able to network.
Go over some of the connections you made out there.
So I went into it, and speaking of transparency, with JPU, I've sort of mentioned to, a handful of folks within the JPU that I'm looking for ways to make the JPU at least break even, because it is fully supported by us. And we are lucky enough to occasionally have sponsor support through Buzzsprout and through, equipment giveaways and things like that. But I'm looking to make JPU as sustainable as possible. And part of that is finding partners that make sense for our future events and what that looks like. And so I spent all of Friday just going booth to booth to the ones that make the most sense. I didn't go to some of the podcast hosting companies besides Buzzsprout because I know where our bread is buttered.
We're loyal. That's why.
And so, with that in mind, it was going and talking to different companies and if they make sense for our audience to partner in the future. And so, speaking from a transparency level, there's food costs that we have to cover for our events. There's drink costs. Food and drink is the easiest way to get people to come to your event, and then education, in my opinion, the education and then the networking. You have to have both of those things at your event. To me, there's a lot of focus around networking events that are just you show up and talk to people. But when you get to a certain professional level, you kind of want to know that your time investment is going to be worth it. And so I think that for our JPU events, there's been a very conscious effort to focus more on the education and the networking side of things, and then being able to, full transparency, be able to find those partners that make the most sense to, maybe they sponsor a badge and they get the most views on, or they get the most viewership or the most impact and engagement from being a badge sponsor because it's around the neck of every single person that's going to be at your event. Or maybe it's the food sponsor and they're really, really good. But finding different creative ways of elements, which I think is very applicable to a podcast show, is what are our segments at events? And then how can we find a partner that makes sense for our audience to be that financial backing, to cover that cost, so it's not coming out of our pockets each time, so that we can continue to make this a sustainable business, a break-even business is my goal. And then from there, it gives us the greater incentive to continue to make events better and better by just small tweaks. Not talking about, throwing a huge conference, but how do we make each sort of 15-minute increment valuable for every single person that comes to our events. And so then that way they continue to come back. And so what do those sponsorship relationships look like? And that was my main goal. And so talked to a few of them. Hopefully we'll be able to work with them in the future, but it's looking good.
Who are some of the standout sponsors, businesses out on the expo floor that you had a good interaction with?
So great interaction with is Adobe Podcast. Adobe Podcast is doing some first of all, let me back it up a little, because Adobe has been around for forever. They have their creative suite of software. Many folks, if you haven't picked up Adobe in a while, you probably know that it was very expensive, but also the learning of each tool took a long time and it took a lot of time investment. But they've evolved into a company that is almost like a Canva level of expertise, where you don't have to be an expert in these different tools. And so how do we, I guess, make that barrier of entry lower for their audience? And so they're doing those same things now in podcasting, where you can right now go and upload your audio file and remove all of the background noise from and you can do that for free. And so what they're building is essentially a tool that you can get rid of all of, 17 different subscriptions that you might have with your recording and with your editing and with your distribution. They're trying to build that all under one roof. And so then that way, and it's $10 a month, like $10 a month.
And I had the opportunity to test out the Adobe podcast software that Blythe was talking about. And it really does feel like the Swiss Army knife of podcasting.
Easy to use too.
You're able to record. I mean, right now the emphasis is just for audio, creating audio only podcasts. I think they talked about integrating video at some point, but right now you're able to join a session with a guest. You can send a link. You join the platform. You hit record. It records. It also by the time you finish recording, you now have a transcription of the episode that's broken down by speakers. It has the text-based editing, so you can edit that episode or that recording using the much like Descript, where it's you could delete a word or text and it'll delete it from the actual recording. They have the ability to also, they had a really very easy filter system to like enhance the audio, and it doesn't, it's not complicated at all. And by the end, you can also export the wave file to throw on your podcast hosting company. And I think the cool part in addition to that too is, I think it's called Adobe Express, is the additional plugin that's built into Adobe Podcast that lets you build podcast artwork. And it works.
No extra fee too.
Yeah.
Adobe Express, I believe, is a paid.
Right now it's a standalone
Yeah.
fee, but as part of this Adobe podcast software, it'll be all rolled into one.
for
So
$10.
so I'm excited for that to also, lower the barrier of entry. Also, like you said, kind of consolidate some of the different subscriptions and software that, I know I personally use a lot of separate software, but Adobe Podcast seems like a beginner podcast dream. Or even, if you're someone that, wants to maybe consolidate your software, I think whenever they roll it out
Yeah.
and make it official, it'll
And I
be
think
huge.
too, it's also exploring the expo floor is one of those things where we're trying to also find resources for you guys, for the audience. And so what is interesting to us might also be interesting to other podcasters out there, especially with the amount of podcasters that we talk to that are facing editing challenges, they're facing marketing challenges. And so for this tool to kind of bring all of those under one roof for a very affordable cost, I think is a home run. And so, that's one that I've got my eye on that, hopefully we'll be able to do some things with in the future. And so that was one company. Another company that really stood out to me was a company called Reframe. Reframe was another one of those companies that is like a virtual studio. And I know that there are, plugins or whatever, not plugins, but you're on like Zoom or you're on like Google Meet and you can change your background and things like that. Still looks a little like funky. It's not, you can tell someone's using one of these backgrounds. But with Reframe, they actually, will edit the show and they provide the service either for standalone shows or they provide it to podcast studios, which, any podcast studios out there, you probably are running into an issue where all of your customers have the same background. And so they're all recording with the same background and it doesn't look like them. It looks like you're recording in sort of a corporate style office. There's no personality there. Well, this company is able to add that personality back in with professional editing services. And so that seemed like a really good solution, for maybe the more, established podcasters or the podcasters who don't want to worry about doing any of the editing and they would rather somebody else do it. Maybe they don't have the best like studio at home or recording space. Well, these guys can actually make that work for you for your given situation. And so that was another company as well.
I think going on the expo floor, especially here at Podfest, you realize depending on if you have a budget for your podcast, you could easily find a service or a provider here that can handle a lot of things like that you wouldn't even think about. Like you said, like this company specialized in backgrounds, virtual backgrounds, and it also provides editing. I think if you have a lot of budget for a podcast and all you want to do is just host the podcast and worry about the guests or a specific thing, then there's a service here. And I think on the flip side, if you don't have a lot of budget, but you're someone that's willing to roll up your sleeves and do a lot of the work in creating your own podcast, well, there's services and, software and programs here that, you wouldn't even think about that would make your life easier. Adobe Podcast being one. I think Reframe is a good example. We're sitting here in the Ecamm booth, Unstuck Studios is what they're calling it. So, just like seeing how they do like mobile setups, I think is inspiring.
The creative activations, which I think are also growing in podcast conferences itself, because podcast movement is more on, the big like iHearts of the world or Spotify and Disney. We're at, the last podcast movement that we were at, but this one is more for, our crowd and for our needs. And so, I'm not just looking at the companies that could potentially sponsor, maybe the food and beverage or equipment at a future JPU event, but it's also what are the resources that we can share that we are experiencing as well. And so two come to mind, the Shure people, that the Shure had a booth. So Shure microphones, I'm sure everybody is well aware of them. We had personal problems that we were facing with equipment issues, or me personally, I'm facing with equipment issues, especially for my on-the-go recording kit. And so I went to the Shure booth, explained to them my problem. They told me exactly what I needed to do with my current equipment, which is actually a competitor of theirs, of what I needed to do to fix the problem. But then they also showed me their solutions
Yeah.
as well. And, we were able to test out the equipment right on site. And then there was another person as well that, offers CPA, public accounting, or is it? No, it's not public accounting. Is it CPA?
CPA. Yep.
Yeah, CPA. That's what the acronym
I think his name
is.
is Philip Taylor.
Yes, Philip Taylor, and accounting, bookkeeping, the legalities around running a podcast. Those are things that you don't really think about until you got to think about it, until you're faced with a copyright strike or a trademark issue, or maybe you get a fat tax bill because you got your first sponsorship check and you had no idea you had to put 30% away to pay Uncle Sam. And so all of these things that you don't realize until you're already in it. Some of those service providers were here as well. And so, to provide a bunch of different resources for you guys, I would highly advise going to any sort of podcast movement or Podfest website and looking at who is sponsoring that event, because then that gives you a sense of the companies that are already making ground in this industry, and maybe ones that you need to check out and see if they have solutions for you too.
I think the other benefit too for coming to a podcast conference like this is the emphasis too on the breakout, like on the not the expo floor, right outside the expo floor. You've got the main kind of hotel area, and just the how podcasters in the self-initiative to do separate meetups. I mean, how many times have we come across what looks like a little mini meetup here, or there's a group here, and we're seeing like podcasters set up, and I think that tribe aspect, like being around your tribe and just being able to wander and maybe walk into just a random meetup and, getting to meet, podcasters that are, at your skill level or above, that are looking for the same thing, that are also looking for inspiration, I think is one of my favorite parts, is just kind of the self-initiative and self-drive that a lot of podcasters have in terms of like, and then also just the ease of conversation. I mean, when we were at the Buzzsprout party, that gentleman, Eric, literally just walked up to us and was like, "Hey, my name's Eric. Who are you guys? What do you do?"
Yeah.
So I think if you're someone that thrives in environments with other people, and you're whether you're extroverted or introverted, I think it's a good atmosphere of like-minded people brainstorming and wanting to achieve the same thing. And I brought this up to you yesterday, but it really does feel like we're all on the same page. I don't think the knowledge gap is that disparaging. There isn't a chasm in terms of like, even like some of these, new podcasters. I think we're in and we'll get to the gentleman yesterday, but we're in such a good time frame or time period for people to be in podcasting, because like the barrier entry is so low, but then also there's so many resources out there to get you easily up on par with a lot of folks that have been doing it.
And I think too, it's getting out of your own head. There are so many podcasters that come to conferences like this. They want to start a show, and then things come up and they make excuses and they never end up starting the show.
Yeah.
And the fear of perfection comes into play. The fear of equipment comes into play, and just thinking that you're not good enough. And I think coming to a conference like this, you realize how quickly that there are people who have been podcasting for 20 years and they faced all of those same issues. And any podcaster that's coming into the game right now, they're still facing those same issues. So the importance of just getting started and hitting publish. Those are the most challenging things that you're going to consistently do over the course of your podcasting career. And just know that. And if you know, and if you're aware of that, then you are able to overcome that much more quickly, especially being around other folks who have experienced the same, and they just persevered and they pushed through it. And once you do that, then you come out on the other side a lot better.
Well said. So Friday, like I mentioned, I was more panel focused. You were definitely more expo floor focused. But towards the end of the day, we got to meet up together and
our own JPU event.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. How could I forget?
I know. I thought you were segueing into that.
In addition, okay. So, and that's where I was kind of getting at is, after I did my kind of panel focus morning, you had your expo floor focus morning. We also had our own JPU little meetup event, which we branded as the Southeast Podcaster Meetup event, which went great. I think, in terms of number wise, it's probably maybe our smallest event to date.
Intimate. Intimate is the way I'll market it.
It was a very intimate meetup. But I think that's what I'm getting at is that, there's a lot going on at this conference. There's panels, there's the expo floor, there's mini meetups and networking events going on. So I do value that people still showed up for our event, and we got to meet some podcasters from the Orlando area, the Gainesville area that are now interested in some future JPU meetups. Was there any highlight from our meetup then?
The biggest highlight from that meetup, that even though it was intimate, that there were a couple there, and one of the guys had talked about he wants to make a podcast and he's been talking about it for years and he's going to do it when he gets home. And I said, no, you need to come over to the eCam area, where we're recording right now, because there's literally a guy that will bully you into making your first episode. He will make you sit down at the microphone and hit record. And right before we started recording, we walk in here, and who did we see? The guy who's been talking about starting a podcast for years. He took our advice, he came over and he recorded his first episode. That to me is like the biggest win of the weekend, is just getting someone over the hump of being able to put out good content. And I think I just want to add an extra note is, maybe, people know us as JPU, and there's a big emphasis from us on, the Jacksonville community. But I really want to spread this out into the southeastern community of podcasters and making Jacksonville a destination. Too often in the Northeast Florida area, we're considered, we're a ville. We're one of those cities that creatives think that they have to leave to become successful. And I think the exact opposite. I think, why not, Jax? I think, why not have these creatives stay here, empower them, and then recruit other people from the area, from Gainesville, Orlando, Savannah. We've had people come from, as far away as, hundreds of miles to come to our events. And so how do we sort of, spread those wings out a little bit more? And so moving into more of, marketing to the southeastern podcasters and being their resource, I think is a win-win for everyone. And it was just awesome to walk in here with our intention to record, and then seeing, a guy that was at our meetup yesterday recording.
And I guess we should also shout out some of our members that are also here at Podfest, which is always lovely to have a piece of home here with us. They also showed up at our meetup as well. I'm talking about Tiffany Mason. I had a chance to talk in more depth with Vintage, and her name was Beth. I think they do the Retro Rewind podcast, if I'm not mistaken.
Or anime. I thought it was,
Retro Anime Rewind podcast. I apologize. I know I'm probably flipping that up, but what matters is that we had a chance to meet them, talk with them a little more. Alex Sanfilippo and Alicia are here, obviously. Alice Rose,
Alicia,
is also here as well. We are on
Retro AV Rewind. Sorry, I just wanted to get that right. Your favorite podcast about retro anime and video games. So we were close.
There we go. All right, but so our meetup went really well, and I'd like to go ahead and wrap up by talking about how we ended our Friday night. We wanted to take a break from networking and talking. We went to the main bar, and lo and behold, we had a gentleman come sit with us who was
unplanned.
He
just came and sat right next to us.
Who just wanted to break himself. He was grabbing a drink before he was going to get inducted into the Podcast Hall of Fame.
No, he has already been inducted. He was one of the. I remember him saying specifically, it's the gentleman's name. He's founder and CEO of Blueberry Hosting.
His name is Todd Cochran, if I'm not mistaken.
And he was one of the 6 people that was inducted in the first round of the Hall of Fame. And then more people were getting inducted.
I think that was
on that Friday night, and so he was going to support them.
Yep. So the Podcast Hall of Fame induction is an event that Podfest does. I'm assuming, I don't know if it's every year, but it's one of their big things they do on, at least it was Friday night here. So we had a chance to sit by Todd Cochran, founder of Blueberry, one of the, I don't know if it's one of the first, but it sounds like it, one of the earliest podcast hosting companies out there. And the guy was a well of inspiration. As you can imagine, from someone who found a founder of a podcast hosting company, he had stories for days, and he had a way of storytelling as well. And me and Blythe spent, I'd say, 30 minutes kind of just listening to this guy's life story and his thoughts on podcasting. And we won't regurgitate every detail, but Blythe, was there any gems out of that conversation of Todd that stood out to you?
There were so many gems. And I think that, we've kind of joked around a lot that, get a bunch of podcasters together and nobody knows when to shut up. We both shut up and just listen to him just tell stories. And he was telling stories from the early days of, building his own server, working full time. I think he was in the Army or the Navy.
Yep.
And so he's in the military and he's trying to get his podcast out, but he's also hosting the files on his own server. And so he's literally like helping to build this industry of what we know today from the ground up. And so I thought that was, I have notes. I don't know if people can see this, but I have notes of just insight that I got from him. And one of the biggest things that I will share that I think, he would be okay with us sharing is he said, it's never been a better time to be an audio podcaster. And he mentions this and he's, we're currently, in the middle of maybe if TikTok is going to be banned or not. And, all of these other, people getting deplatformed, creators getting creators striked on YouTube and their channel gets taken down without warning. And so with audio podcasting, it really is the strength of the medium that you're uncancelable, if I'm saying that wrong, but you have that freedom. And we've sort of talked about on this show before about, you're only going to own your email list, your website, and your podcast feed. Those are the only internet properties that you will ever own. And so being able to come at it from that angle and, the power of your voice, and him saying it's never been a better time to be an audio podcaster, I thought was a great takeaway considering how long he's been doing it and been, deeply involved with it.
I think one of my bigger takeaways out of that conversation is that I had asked him if there was any significant event in podcasting that he saw through his years. And I believe he's someone that started podcasting and dabbling in the industry in 2004? 2004, which, precedes my journey into podcasting
by 10 years.
10 years alone. So he's seen a lot. He's been there since day one, safe to say. And I was looking to hear if there was any like historical moment or big event that he felt really changed the game for podcasting. And I was really interested by his answer that just the incremental events. There isn't one major thing. It was small things like the podcast app on Apple and, it being a stock app on iPhone. And
COVID was another one.
COVID was obviously one, and just how that had a huge spike in and the surge of podcasts, people that became podcasters. I feel like there was one other.
So he talked about different inflection points. And I think what he was more like positioning is that, yes, we've had these inflection points of, podcasts being on the iPhone or, being in iTunes. COVID was another one. Celebrities also coming into the mix that it gives podcasting a bump as far as, awareness is concerned and just people using the platform. But he said if you take out those...
Social media was the other one too.
Yeah. And
then the rise of Instagram, TikTok, things like that also had a positive impact on podcasting.
But he said if you take out those inflection points, it's still 2 to 3% growth every single year as far as podcast adoption is concerned. And so that kind of led into more of a discussion around if TikTok gets banned, where does that attention go? I know, TikTok kind of gets blamed for a lot of our attention span issues, but to Todd's point, that was, what these social platforms are inflection points. They introduce your content to an audience that may not have discovered it before, because we all know that podcasting, if someone discovers your show, it's more from word of mouth. And so if you can have these different moments where you can turn short form content into long form attention, then that is a win-win for everyone. And so where does that attention go? How does it evolve? And, we've seen a lot of different ways that attention spans evolve over, sort of since the internet age, but to know that podcasting still has that consistent growth year over year of 2 to 3%, regardless of, all of these outside elements, it was really encouraging to hear.
Absolutely. I think that was maybe the key takeaway was the encouragement to hear from him about his thoughts on podcasting and someone that's been so close to it and monitored it so closely. It sounds like you said, audio podcasts are thriving. RSS being a invaluable medium, I guess is maybe a safe phrase for it. And how protected that is, regardless of the social, economic times and anything going on in the world, the RSS feed is still, kind of like rather safe. And I think we had he also brought up some interesting points about AI and like how he's embracing it into his own processes and using it to, do a lot of the guesswork, but also from a podcast perspective, you know, utilizing ChatGPT to eliminate a lot of like, or condense and consolidate, a lot of the services, much like, we were talking about Adobe Podcasts, being a Swiss Army knife, utilizing ChatGPT and AI to take care of a lot of tasks and podcasts, whether that's show notes, descriptions, kind of like ranking, seeing if your podcast is being a part of those conversations.
And I where he made some really enlightening points, because I'm currently building a company where I'm choosing where some of the content is going to be behind quote unquote a paywall, not necessarily a paywall, but you have to log in order to see it. And that was a conscious decision on my end, because I wanted to protect my content from data scrapers, from these other AI tools, and, protecting my data as almost like my own resource. And then having another strategy for content that I do intend for it to be scraped by, search engines like Google, and then obviously, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, all of these different tools that exist. And his mindset was, I just want everybody to have it. With his content in particular, he's like, I open all of my content up. I want all of the scrapers scraping my content, because I want my show and my content to appear in those results. And so I don't want to get too technical, because I could spend all day talking about, the SEO. And I think we've actually had dedicated episodes to this. So go back and listen if you want more, I guess, granular. I can't speak today.
Granular.
Granular.
We spent the last 48 hours talking.
I'm toast.
Day. Yeah.
Trying to pull it together.
But I think overall, having that conversation with Todd, founder of Blueberry, was definitely a great way to end a full day at Podfest, which brings us to today. We had our panel rather early with Tom and Alex talking about creative ways to monetize your show outside of the traditional ads and sponsors. I thought the panel went really well. I thought, like I said, the audience was engaged, and it's just reassuring to know that, none of us are that none of us are that far ahead, especially as indie podcasters. We don't have the backing of a major corporation or unlimited budget. So a lot of the strategies that we share, that we've implemented in our own shows, it's nice to know that, it resonates with other podcasters, and it got got people thinking. So I think with that being said, do you have anything to add from our panel this morning?
Well, I think just being here, having the conversation with Todd when he was in his early days of podcasting and monetizing the podcast, having no idea what the value of a listener was, and just as a series of trial and error. He talked about the early days of forming a partnership with GoDaddy, even though he insinuated that he talked a little bit of crap about them in a previous episode and was upfront with them about it. But GoDaddy still wanted to support him, support his show, and he threw out a price and they accepted right away. And so anytime that happens in a sort of a sponsorship negotiation, you priced yourself too low. Yeah. So then what is he talked about the experience of when the contract came back up for renewal. He threw out an even higher price and they accepted right away. And so knowing that he dealt with those challenges 20 years ago, and then going to our panel and talking to other podcasters that are trying to figure out how to monetize and put value on their own show, we are all trying to answer these questions, and everybody has a different answer and a different pathway. And so I think that's why we try to be so transparent with what we try to do in our own shows in order to help other podcasters from their perspective know that you don't have to, there's no clear-cut model to this. We're all trying to figure this shit out as we go. That's never going to change. It's probably always going to be the constant, is that we're just trying to figure it out a little bit better, and we're going to be able to pull nuggets of information from those other people.
Well said. And before it gets too, like I said, we are in a room in a hotel full of podcasters.
You should see Badr's eyes right now. Well, maybe they can't see it.
A lot of background noise. So I think of that being said, I'll wrap it up by saying, if you are someone that is trying to get into podcasting or has been podcasting for a while, and maybe you feel stuck, maybe you're like, okay, what is the next level? Like, what are some ideas that I haven't thought about? I think attending a conference like Podfest, where you're surrounded by companies that specialize in services for podcasters, that specialize in catering to podcasters and giving them solutions, but also being around like-minded individuals who, I mean, like I said, there's podcasters here that are brand new and then ones that have been podcasting for a while. I think being around the energy here, the conversations, you're bound to be inspired,
Mhm.
whether that's to start a show or maybe, oh, I didn't think about that. Oh, that's a unique experience. Let me see if that's applicable to my show. I think there's a lot of value to be gained from the people you meet, the panels they offer, the events they throw here. I thought, coming to Podfest, um, great time. It was a
It's a
great time. It's got
win-win,
me
I think, for
thinking.
all aspects. It's not just our shows individually; it's this show that we do
Yep.
together, and then it's also providing those resources
For
to
the
other
community.
folks, and hopefully, building a sustainable business that we can continue providing these resources for them.
Well said. And I think with that being said, I will turn the tables on the listeners. If you attended Podfest this year, hopefully we ran into you, but if you attended this year and maybe you learned something new, a nugget, a gem, an interaction that is worthwhile hearing, we'd love to hear from you guys. Shoot us an email at team@jackpodcastunited.com or leave us some fan mail. Buzzsprout now has that fan mail option. You could text us directly. So check out the show notes. Let us know how your time at Podfest went. Or if you got any questions about the conference that maybe we didn't answer, we'd love to hear that as well. But my name is Badr. That was Blythe. This is the JPU show. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll catch you around. Take care of yourselves. Bye.